At the end of 2021, I decided to enter into a year of intentional celibacy. Here's what I learned. Hello and welcome to Temple of Akasha, the home of embodied spirituality with me, Natasha. Today, we're going to be diving into 5 things I learned from my year of intentional celibacy. So this was something that organically emerged at the end of my last relationship dissolving. I had a very clear directive from Spirit to take an entire year out of my adult life and not engage with anyone sexually, and to really draw my energy back, to really focus on self-love and self-pleasure and exploring my own body in a way that I'd never done before. This is the first time I had been celibate intentionally ever, and this is the most prolonged period of time that I hadn't had sex in a long time. So this was an undertaking for me, and when I started it, I thought that it was going to be really ominous and I thought it was going to be a really difficult year, but I'm actually surprised at how effortless it became, and I'm really excited to share with you the 5 things that I feel were most valuable from the experience that I learned. So let's dive in. I will also add that yes, I am still celibate, and I will explain why I'm choosing to remain celibate at the end of this video. Number 1. We require intimacy beyond sex, but we often source it solely through sex. And this was pretty groundbreaking for me. When I entered into the year, I thought going without sex was going to be difficult. What I didn't anticipate was that the way in which I had been sourcing closeness and intimacy with another person was also through sex. So when you take sex away, you also take the access to intimacy and closeness away. And what has really become apparent to me is that our need for intimacy is not synonymous with sex. As human beings, we are social beings. We are naturally drawn to be in connection with others. And unfortunately, we seem to have fallen into a rather sad and unhealthy trap as a society of not expressing closeness and intimacy with another adult human unless we're in some kind of sexual interaction with them. It's very rare that intimacy is normalized beyond sex. And this is having a dire impact, I think, on our mental health as a global population, especially here in the West, with what I would say are actually in some ways more rigid like gender standards and norms than I've seen in other cultures, because there is this sense that we can't express and we can't ask for intimacy and closeness because it would be weird or it would be judged, when actually it's really normal to need and want to be close to another human being. It's one of our fundamental needs as babies for touch and closeness, attachment to another being. And we still have that need for intimacy as adults, but we've lost healthy ways of sourcing it beyond sex. And I would argue that many people are having sex when actually what they're longing for is intimacy, and they are 2 different things. So this year of intentional celibacy for me really illuminated the difference between sex, which is of course a naturally intimate act, but the difference between sex and intimacy. Intimacy could be as simple as, hand holding, hugging, massage, and those do not have to be sexual acts. It could just be being in close proximity to another person. It could be just being held. What I realized is, unless we have really open friends, I've got a lot of really beautiful open friends who during this period were expressive with me and allowed me to express my need for intimacy, and I received massages and I was held, and I'm so fortunate that I have beautiful people around me that were able to top up my need for closeness and intimacy. I realized that there is still such an absence of it in our day-to-day lives, and it can feel like having a drop of water in the desert when you actually receive closeness and intimacy as an adult, having not had it for a very long time. And it's a really sad predicament that we find ourselves in. And to me, it's completely unnatural and completely unhealthy that we've fallen into this situation that intimacy is being defined as sex, because they are not the same. So my big takeaway from this is that we as adults need intimacy, we need closeness, we need to be in close proximity physically with other people, we need emotional intimacy too, we need to feel safe and held and loved, and we want to receive the gift of touch, non-sexual touch, and it shouldn't be something that we should feel ashamed of asking for or of giving or of receiving. Number two, the importance of getting to know our bodies independent of another person. So I don't know how many of you have taken the time to really explore your own body, your own connection to pleasure, your own sexuality outside of an intimate dynamic with another person. I know I hadn't really taken that time. I'll be really open here. I've been a sexual person for a lot of my life. I've had a lot of sexual kundalini energy active in me for a lot of my life. And so I've been self-pleasuring for a lot of my life. But what I realized was I had been accessing pleasure through a patriarchal or masculine, even distorted masculine lens of trying to achieve an outcome, i.e. have an orgasm or climax. And I was never really ever focusing on the journey, or indeed the ability to access really subtle forms of pleasure that are only available in the present moment, when we really sink into the five sense perception system, when we really sink into the felt sense of what it means to be here and now in this present moment with everything we can taste, touch, smell, see, hear. And what has been pretty revolutionary for me was actually taking time away from interacting with another body so that I could really understand my own sexuality as an individual, not linked to someone else. Because I will also be honest here in saying that I used to watch a lot of porn. And what I've realized is a lot of our sexual conditioning is unfortunately derived from sources like porn. And so a lot of my sexuality has been quite performative in the past, to try and adhere to some standard that I'd obviously had ingrained in my consciousness that wasn't actually authentic to me. And so I don't watch porn anymore, and I haven't for many years. And obviously not having had physical sex with another person, it gave me the freedom to understand how my body responds to pleasure, to touch, to sensation, to presence. And it's been revolutionary. I'm 30 years old now, and I would say that I've just had my sexual awakening. Bearing in mind, I've had multiple long-term relationships, a few sexual partners, and I've been a sexual person my whole life. This has been like revolutionary, to really take the time to understand what parts of my body respond to touch, what parts of my body do I love to be touched, how do I love to be touched, and actually gifting that to myself and really taking the time to explore the ways that I like to express. So I really took time last year to adorn myself in ways that felt sexy. I've never ever resonated with the term of being sexy. I never considered myself to be sexy. I felt very uncomfortable with that label whenever someone would call me it. And last year was the first year where I was like, I feel kind of sexy. And it's like, it's because for the first time in my life, I'm not being performative in how I access my sexuality. I'm just actually accessing my organic expression of my sexuality. And that's really liberating. And it's natural, it's organic. There's nothing performative or contrived about it. And so I would say that having time away from another person, because when we've got another being with us, especially if they're a partner, unconsciously we are often dancing with them shadow to shadow, especially when it comes to sex, because so many of us hold a lot of sexual wounding. Our shadows are dancing, so our wounded parts or our disempowered parts are often dancing during sex, and we're not always able to access the most empowered expression in sexual experiences. Of course we can, but there is often an undertone or some kind of influence of the shadow or wounded parts too. So it was really beautiful to have the safety of my own presence to really just be authentic and say, like, how do I like to show up in sex? How do I like to show up in my sexuality? How do I like to express? How do I like to dress? And I've learned some stuff about myself, and I can't wait to continue this journey of getting to know my body even when I'm in a relationship with another person. And that's another thing I really want to mention, that if you are not single and you're in a relationship with someone, this is still as important, if not more so, for you to understand your sexuality independent of your partner. You can, of course, have a sexual dynamic with them, but to really enhance your sex life, to really enhance your experience of sex, you need to be attuned to your present moment needs, your present moment desires, because they do evolve, they do change, they do shift. And to do that, you need to take some time for yourself. So, as I now regularly do, take some time to be with yourself and explore yourself. You deserve that time, and I think you'll thank me for making that recommendation. Number 3, sexual energy is not just for sex. And I think that this is particularly true, or perhaps apparent, for those of us who have had interactions with or experienced the Kundalini regularly. If you have active Kundalini in your system, if the Kundalini is awoken in you, if you've had an explosion like me, or if you just feel her stirring and she's available to all of us, what you'll notice is that that energy is innately sexual. Sexual energy is life force energy. It's like it's the creative energy that fuels, right? It fuels creation. When we have sex, we create a being. And so sexual energy is an innately creative and raw energy. And I think, again, because we don't have really any sexual education in our society, we don't have any energetic education in our society, we are still operating from quite a lower state of consciousness, like these kind of primal drives when it comes to sex of, when I feel sexual, I've got to go and have sex or have a wank. And actually, sexual energy is, I would argue, like the most valuable energy we have. Having spent a year really exploring my sexual energy, realizing that is the Kundalini, that is the pulse of life force within you, throbbing, rising, writhing, and ready to be expressed. And it doesn't need to be expressed sexually. So this last year for me has been a real unlearning of my habituated tendency to feel turned on, which happens a lot for me, and to then need to go and masturbate and to spend that energy, I've got to get rid of it. I've got to do something with it. What I learned this year is that we can feel sexual energy in our bodies. And I will say that it's probably a little bit more difficult for men than it is for women, given there are certain physical implications if you're really turned on as a man. But I would say that to be able to feel sexual energy in your body and to be able to channel it, or to even just be able to move through your lived experience with that pleasure in your body, that hum of pleasure in your body, is really magical. And that energy that feels sexual, that wants to drive a creative process in some way, can be channeled into other projects other than birthing life, right? Because, there are many of us that feel sexual energy that don't want to procreate. So that energy is really just an invitation to create, to flow with life. And it's like, what wants to flow through you? Can you allow yourself to just receive the juiciness of what it feels like to be turned on by life? That's been huge for me over the last year. I've become more and more turned on by life. And that's kind of almost a baseline for me now. Not always, sometimes I have other things going on and that sexual energy is dampened, or it's just not as active. But I find myself more and more turned on by life. And that is no longer something that feels like a burden to me. It's like, oh, I need to go and have an orgasm. Like, no, I can breathe this energy throughout my body. I can circulate it and give it back to myself. I can wallow and bathe in it because it feels really juicy. And this is a very feminine polarity kind of expression or experience. This is a very feminine quality, to be able to bathe in pleasure and not necessarily need to be directive with that energy, to do something with it, to just be in it. The feminine is innately sexual. The feminine is innately creative. The feminine Kundalini energy is innately in flow, is an energy that wishes to just be and feel, and actually is innately quite pleasurable. So Can we just be with that energy? Can we channel that sexual, joyous, juicy energy into our creative or business projects? Can we channel it into fun? Can we channel it into our day-to-day life and recognize that sexual energy and experiencing sexual energy does not always mean that we need to have sex, nor is it always linked to sex. Sexual energy is just life force energy, active and awake within us. And I think if we were educated on this as a society, it would make the world of difference, because so many people are operating from this baseline of, I feel sexual energy, and I need to do something with it. And I think that there are a lot of really horrible implications from that. If we learn to truly understand the divine nature of this energy, how it can be used and channeled in so many other ways, how it could just be experienced as a personal experience and used to nourish ourselves from the inside out, I think we would see radical shifts in the world. Again, this is just my opinion and my lived experience, but it's been really radical to recognize that sexual energy is not just for sex. Number 4, sex is a sacred act, and this could be contested by other people. It could be something that people think is controversial. I don't care. This is my embodied experience that when we exchange energy with another person in such an intimate way, when we share our body with another person in such an intimate way, we are entangling ourselves energetically. We are giving someone access to the most divine, sacred, private, intimate aspects of us. And this is not something to be done lightly. It's not something to be done flippantly. And I speak as someone that did used to enter into fairly casual sex outside of my long-term relationships. And this year of really taking the time to be with my body, to begin the process of womb healing in a very deep and intentional way, to really unpick my relationship with sex, I've come to the conclusion that sex is sacred. And in fact, I believe it is the most sacred act, actually, when entered into with intention, that we can engage with another person. Because if you think about the alchemy of sex, it's two beings coming together as one, the duality returning to the singularity. And what happens in that act, potentially, is the alchemy of creation. An egg and a sperm come together to create new life. So there is nothing to me more sacred, more intrinsic to our very nature than sex. And we have relegated it to a pastime, to a hobby, to something that we just enter into lightly, flippantly, without regard for the consequences, especially the energetic consequences, and especially for women. Because when, as women, we allow a man to enter us, when we allow our yoni temple, our womb space to be penetrated in that way, if you're having sex with a man, but with anyone entering that space, with any aspect of their being, they are imprinting their energy into your physical body. And what I realized during my womb healing process is that we store the energy of the people that we've interacted with sexually in our bodies. We often have cords to them energetically. And what was really interesting for me during this process was that as I began to realize the sanctity of my body, of my womb space, of my yoni, as I began to truly cherish my body as a sacred vessel in a way that I never had before, I felt my own masculine energy rise up, my own inner protector rise up to say, no one will enter until they have proven themselves worthy again. Because like many people watching this, I'm sure I've had sexual experiences that have not been empowering, that have unfortunately been either uncomfortable, unhealthy, or indeed breached boundaries for me in quite a significant way. And so when we share our bodies with another person, we are really being vulnerable with them. We are giving them access to those deepest, most intimate parts of us in a real and tangible way, actually, because access to me, access to the yoni, access to this portal is so sacred. And if we do not have boundaries in place to really discern, is the person who I'm considering interacting with in this way, do they understand that access to me is a privilege, that I am someone of high value because I'm a being, we're all of high value? Do they understand that this is a sacred act? Do they understand that this is not just something for gratification? And really just, for me, really just beginning to activate that inner masculine protector that says, I will guard you. I will make sure, because you can't always trust someone else to be able to take responsibility for that, for themselves in that way. So actually, it's like, rather than waiting for a man to decide, okay, now I'm ready to interact with you in this place, I don't know his motives necessarily. I have to use my own intuition and discernment and decide, is the person that I'm considering interacting with in that way, are they ready to be with me, my body, my spirit, in a way that I feel honors me and honors my body? Because this is not a dumping ground. Our bodies are not dumping grounds, but we treat them like dumping grounds. Men and women alike, we treat them like dumping grounds. And actually, it has helped me to activate and cultivate a tremendous amount of self-love, to recognize the sanctity of my body, to recognize the sanctity of sex, the act of sex, and to choose moving forwards not to engage in sex with just anyone, which I wouldn't have done anyway. I'm beyond that now. But to really be very discerning about who has access to me, and to be able to know that I will stand up for myself and I will protect myself from imposters or people with ulterior motives, especially as someone that's highly intuitive and can feel into a person's motivations, and I can feel into the energy behind what a person's doing. I know now that I do not just need to open to anyone that I have attraction to, that I have a masculine aspect of my consciousness now that will stand and will be on guard and will not just, allow anyone to enter my space. And that feels really empowering, because now it's like, I finally have ownership of my sexuality. I'm not going to give it away. I'm not going to give it access, to me, to just anyone. And that has helped to reinforce a tremendous amount of self-value. So to me, sex is a very sacred act. Of course, there are potential implications for it as well. There is the possibility of creating new life. And that is also something that I think we have really lost touch with. That a soul can be seeded in form from the act of sex. And yes, we can take contraceptives. And yes, there are things we can do if we don't want that to happen, if we do fall pregnant. But the reality is, there are karmic, energetic implications for that. And again, I think when we choose to become truly self-sourced, self-responsible, devoted to the path of God and heart-led living, we don't take those kinds of actions lightly. And I think we recognize, or we're being invited to recognize as truly conscious, awake humans, that there are implications to what we do beyond which we've been conditioned to believe, right? That sex is just this throwaway thing for pleasure. Of course, it's a pleasurable act. There are also consequences and implications beyond that. And to enter into an act that can seed life into form in such a flippant way, to me now, I feel is very unholy. That is just my opinion. And some people might call me a prude for that. And some people might think that I'm being whatever. I don't give a shit. That is my embodied experience as someone on the path of devotion. And I think that perhaps for many of you, you will resonate with this as well, that the conscious way is the way that considers all things and takes responsibility for those many different implications, doesn't bypass or avoid. And ultimately, sex is alchemy. It's a very high form of alchemy. It's also a portal potentially for really accessing higher consciousness when we enter into it with another being that also has that intention. Look at systems like Tantra. So the potential for the expansion of consciousness is very, very high when we enter into sex. And so we've got the lower expression of sex, which we've been seeing playing out, here on Earth for tens, if not hundreds of years, thousands of years. This very flippant, animalistic approach to sex. The higher path, the higher expression of sex is to recognize the sanctity of it, to recognize that it is a path to awakening, to evolution, conscious evolution, to sacred union, to true vulnerability and intimacy, and the bliss that's available with that. And so it is not something to be entered into lightly. And finally, number 5, unlocking our true, authentic sexual expression has the potential to unlock the truth of who we are. And what I mean by this is sexual energy and our innate sexual expression in the ways in which we want to channel our sexual energy, the ways we want to move it through us, the ways we want to be expressed in it. That is like the rawest, most vulnerable way that potentially that we can show up in the world. And so when we start to embrace our true organic sexual expression beyond conditioning, beyond the standards that have been set out in society or by porn, when we truly take the time to access and understand our own sexuality, we unlock our own authenticity. And I saw this unfold last year, how embracing my innate sexual expression more and more and more also then allowed me to express more organically in so many other areas of my life. And I found myself dressing in a way that felt more innately empowering. I found myself creating in ways that felt more empowering. I found myself returning to my organic roots as someone that is very expressed. And so again, to me, this comes back down to the power of sexual energy. It's life force energy. So when we tap into it and embrace it, we unlock our soul potential. We unlock our authentic expression. We unlock the true organic flow of consciousness through us and into the world. We unlock the truth of who we are. And so I actually think that it's a divine duty for those of us on the path of God-led, heart-led awakening to take the time to explore our innate sexuality. This is especially true because we are clearing tremendous amounts of karmic, fear-based conditioning around sex from the church and from established religions and institutions that have for so long shamed sex. Being brought up Catholic and having had a lot of religious experiences in my ancestral lineage and in past lives, I know that there has been a tremendous amount of conflict within my being. This part of me that is innately sexual and that is also terrified and ashamed of embracing and expressing that sexuality. To me, any aspect of ourselves that we are denying and shaming and repressing is not true integrative work. How can it be? We are simply, relegating those aspects of us to the shadow. And as we know with shadow work, anything that is not integrated and remains in the dark finds its own unconscious way of expressing in our lives, which can often be quite harmful. So it is our duty as conscious beings to reframe our relationship with sex, to undo the lifetimes, the millennia of conditioning around sex that has made it shameful, that has made it something that we need to try and repress, to recognize that sexual expression is what it is, an innate part of what it means to be human. And when we give ourselves permission to really, truly embrace it, to understand our innate sexuality, and really be open to what that looks like, right? So like dissolving any and all ideas, really being open to it. Not only do we help clear and balance the collective karma around what it means to be human, we are also at an individual level helping to liberate ourselves. We are helping to bring all of us back into the present. We are helping to integrate all aspects of ourselves, embrace ourselves fully, know that no part of us is shameful. I listen to a lot of kind of worship songs, Hillsong worship songs. I think that they're very they're beautiful, they're devotional songs, but one thing I've really noticed recently is that a lot of the lyrics are around like, I'm not worthy and of God's love, of Jesus' love, whatever. And actually I've kind of stopped listening to those songs on that basis, because I'm like, this demeaning, self-deprecating energy that we are less than the divine, that somehow we're not worthy of the divine, this shame and separation from the divine, which was implemented on purpose. It's time to move beyond that bullshit. It's time to recognize that God did not create our sexuality and our ability to express and feel pleasure for it to be something that is shamed and denied. That is a human imposition and construct. It's time to undo that bullshit, dissolve that bullshit, and come into full authentic expression, because our full authentic expression is the medicine for the world. Every single one of us is a pioneer. So when we step up and show up fully as ourselves in life, we are a pioneer of consciousness. We are helping the species to evolve consciously, beyond conditioning, beyond fear-based programs. So it's your divine duty to unlock your sexuality, to become sexually expressed, to reclaim your sexuality in whatever way that looks like for you. And maybe that means recognizing that you're not actually that someone that really is that innately sexual, or maybe you recognize that actually you've been really denying your sexuality. There is no right or wrong, but it's coming back to your organic sexual expression and place of embodiment beyond limits, conditions, and programming. That is the divine invitation, and I feel our divine duty. So I hope these points were helpful. I hope they've given you some food for thought. This year has been so incredibly transformational for me in ways that I just did not expect. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I have decided to continue practicing intentional celibacy, not for a set amount of time. I'm really beginning to trust my body's intuition, and I am on a journey of devotion. I am setting the intention to enter into sacred union with the right partner at the right time. And so I'm going to trust my body. I'm going to trust my instincts. I'm going to trust God that when it's time for me to end this process, I'll know. But it has been incredibly liberating, and it's been incredibly holding and nurturing to be able to set those boundaries for myself, to know that I create safety for myself by deciding who gets to enter my space in that way. I get to decide who I exchange my energy with in that way. It's so liberating, and it's really helped me move beyond kind of victim, powerless states, because I'm becoming empowered by activating my own boundaries, by activating my own masculine protector energy. And so, yeah, I will continue this practice of intentional celibacy for as long as it feels right. And I'd be really interested to know whether or not you've been tempted by the possibility of entering into a period of intentional celibacy. Has this video changed your mind? Have you considered it? Have you already started it? It's something that if you have never done it before, I would really encourage it, even for just a short amount of time, just to help a little reset for your mind, body, and spirit, to really come back to home base, come back to yourself, free of interacting with another person. And if you've been celibate for a while, maybe not by choice, I invite you to enter into that process more intentionally, to really start mining the gifts from that. See that space you have from being with another person intimately in that way as a divine buffer, so that you can really learn what pleasure means to you, what self-love means to you, what your sexuality means to you. Use this time wisely so that when you do come into intimate communion, sacred union, or partnership, you can enter into that from an empowered place sexually, and ultimately in your authentic expression. So I hope this video was helpful. I'm so grateful to have you here on the channel. If this content was something that you resonated with, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the right people find my work and content. Would love to hear your thoughts and comments below as always, and I really look forward to connecting with you again soon. Take good care, guys.